Hi, Sam. How are you?
I'm good, Chris. How are you today?
I'm doing good. It's rainy, which is nice. It's rainy and cold, which
I
somehow
know.
it feels like it should be.
I
It's a
love it. I'm
nice,
looking out of the
it's a
window and I
nice
love
beginning.
I love the light. I love this autumn light. I know I call it autumn rather than fall.
Yeah, no,
And it's
it
just
sounds
beautiful.
better. Yeah, no. So I'm excited. Well, it's good to be back with you.
You too.
Wonderful. Well, we're really excited to have Joelle Te Paske here. Is that the way you pronounce it?
That's exactly how you pronounce it. Thank you.
Perfect. And it's been really lovely to get to know Joelle in lots of different ways. Partially, she grew up here at the church, which is really wild. But then also, she's our very first sponsored seminarian, which means Joelle just started during the midst of the pandemic, which we can chat about because my gosh, what a crazy moment to start. But started at Harvard Divinity School and this is your second year, right?
This is my second year.
So I'm really curious about Div School. So I'm one of those people who has no experience of seminary or divinity school. And I'm really curious what it's like. So I imagine that a lot of folks who are going to be listening to this, they think, like me, that seminary is about reading the Bible, learning some Greek and some Hebrew, and learning about the history of theology and reading Thomas Aquinas. But what's it really like? What do you study?
Sure.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's like. No.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say that. I'm like, that is what it's like. And I'm like, no, it's not. Wait a minute. I still hold that in my head, even though I'm doing it. Yeah. So it's a great question. Thank you. I'll speak to what Harvard Divinity School
Yeah.
looks and feels like. It's, there's, as people can probably imagine, there's a whole range. There's more conservative seminaries out there. There's more progressive ones. A place like Harvard Divinity is very interdisciplinary and very interfaith by design. So you do have folks doing everything you just outlined, but they're one of many, many different kinds of people on campus doing different things. So my program in particular, I'm in the Master of Divinity program, which usually puts people towards ministerial work or service-oriented work, doing stuff out in the world. A lot of people, a tremendous amount of people in my program are interested in chaplaincy. So being a chaplain at a hospital or a prison or in the army, and doing spiritual work in that regard. And so you have this contingent of people who are basically doing academic courses, which can be in a lot of different faith traditions, mixed with some history and anthropology courses. And then they're doing a fair amount of what they call field education, which are internships at various different sites. It can be nonprofits, it can be churches, it can be mosques. And they're doing a field education requirement, which I'm also doing. And then a whole other part of the program are people doing a sort of like a more research-oriented degree, which might be different than what people think of seminary. And I think it's unique for this one in particular as a divinity school. You have folks doing more research-based, history-based studies. They might be studying a certain time period or a certain subject area. A lot of people going on to do PhDs and do more research or become professors. And then you get a whole range of people, I kind of include myself in there too, who are poets, artists, musicians, teachers, social workers, going to go on to do maybe other work in law, things like that. So pretty wide range of people. I'd say like, 2 classes I'm taking this semester. One is called Spiritual Pathways to Abstract Art. We're looking at the religious and spiritual lives of artists.
Oh, that's
another
amazing.
class. Oh, it's a lovely class. And another one is Magic in the Contemporary World. We're learning about contemporary magic practitioners from someone who studies neo-pagans in southern Italy. She's an anthropologist. And a lot of languages and a whole bunch of stuff like that too. But there's a whole range of people doing different things. I both celebrate and worry about comparing it to Hogwarts. but there are elements. Sometimes it feels like people are all doing, especially because I'm in this magic class. So I don't know if my professor would like my comparison to Hogwarts. Anyway, there's a whole range of people doing all sorts of, I sort of think, like magical things, depending on what faith background they're coming from. You also have atheists. I should mention that. You have people who are not necessarily coming from a particular faith background at the school. So you have a lot of different people, but a lot of interesting people. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it that made you decide you wanted to become a UU minister? Was there a moment in your life when you made the decision, or was it a gradual thing? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm still defining what UU ministry looks like in my life, even. I think there was no defining moment for me. For a lot of my classmates, there certainly was. For me, it was more sort of following what my values were and where they were taking me. So even when I was working in the art world, doing communications work or working with community organizer, artist types, there were values underpinning that work that kept bringing me back. As I mentioned, like even thinking about youth group around the way I wanted to be with people, the people I wanted to be listening to in the room, and the sort of like the context I wanted to be in. I wanted them to be with people with lots of different belief systems. I didn't know that progressive places, interdisciplinary places like Harvard Divinity existed at first either. I thought of seminary very much like you first described. So I was looking at programs that were not necessarily divinity schools and met some people along the way who had gone to divinity school and done interesting research. And I was surprised by their work and sort of captivated by their work. And yeah, made my way essentially into the program in that regard. But it was really the UU theology or belief system, or the values rather, like that brought me into this path.
I love it. Even 17, whatever, how many years ago, 20, whatever. But when I went into seminary myself, already there was a lot of people who were, exploring religious leadership in lots of different ways. And that's only increased over time. So there's so many ways that people are serving and stepping into, formation to deepen their service in lots of different ways. It's really exciting. I mean, I'm sort of one of the old school dinosaurs of like wanting to serve churches for all of my days. And there's really a lot of different ways that ministry can look in the world, which is great. So how was it beginning this whole process remotely? So you were jumped into seminary and you were in Brooklyn. How was that beginning? What was that like, navigating all that?
Yeah, good question. It was really hard. I imagine a lot of people, doing whatever we were doing, making the transition and then trying something new. Pandemic's been going on long enough that we were all trying to change and grow and do new things often too. So it was such a strange thing. I don't think I'll ever do anything like it. Divinity School year 1 on Zoom. Some really lovely and unexpected things happened. I remember in one rather large Zoom lecture, some students sort of like took over the chat. They sort of proclaimed anarchy in the chat, and there was a whole range of comments that you could never have in an in-person forum, talking about the syllabus, talking about the canon, there were ways that people used the technology to really shine, in my opinion, and offer feedback. But there was also just all the hard stuff, all the Zoom church, trying to connect with people, trying to meet people, and doing these funny, like one-on-one, what ended up feeling like informational interviews when really you just wanted to like have a cup of coffee with someone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, then we've all been experiencing the funny stuff of being in person, having been little Zoom boxes for the year, which is interesting too.
Yeah. And I find seeing how tall people are is wild.
It's wild.
Even people I've known. Like, I'm a full-on middle 5'9" guy. And like, I am shocked to see how tall and how short people are, because you're used to them in these little boxes for so long.
Yeah. How people walk, it's just, body language is a really big part of us all communicating.
Yeah. I'm taking a class at the moment on Old English with an Italian graduate student who did her first year at Harvard in her Celtic languages program over Zoom from Italy.
Wow.
And so simultaneously, she's starting classes for the first time at Harvard in real life and being in the United States for the first time in real life.
Wow.
So it's a huge transition for her.
Wow. And so then you moved, which is always a fresh kind of hell. How was that?
I will say I love Somerville. So, like, as you mentioned, I grew up in Cambridge and then in Belmont, and did coming of age and youth group and everything at the church. Then moved away and lived in Brooklyn and New York for a little over 10 years. And now I'm back living in East Somerville. So it's a part of the city that I've never had any experience with.
Yeah.
And so interesting. It is such an interesting life experience to be doing something so new in a place that you grew up.
Yeah.
There's like a threshold in Harvard Square. There's portions of it I never really spent time in, the Div School being one of those places. But there's like a threshold I cross at some point where it starts to get real confusing in my brain. Taking on this like identity of graduate student, but then hanging out like at the garage where I used to like hang out at Newbury Comics and when I was 16. So just a really interesting mashup. I don't know if you can prepare yourself for that until you do it. And so I'm doing it now. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a really similar experience moving back here because I grew up in Framingham, not far away, but then I lived in town when I went to BU and stayed here for about 8 or 9 years. And it's just been fascinating to come back and sort of rediscover places as a whole new person, as a whole new kind of version of self. I love that you touch on coming of age in the youth group. So what was that like growing up in the church, and what, if anything, were sort of the lasting, imprints or messages, or what did you?
Yeah. So let's see. My family joined the church. I think I was around, was I 12 or so? So yeah, came in around middle school. And one lasting thing now, especially being in a program studying religion and especially like various interfaith contexts, I think a lot about visiting different places of worship as part of UURE. There's something about the fact that we actually went in person to these spaces as a group, as a fundamental educational way of experiencing the world that is still with me when I'm reading about different faiths. And I try not to take that for granted. Like the fact that I've sat in a Quaker meeting house, or I've gone to Catholic mass, these different experiences, those certainly still bubble up. And then also just experience wise, like youth group, thought like that experiential learning thing, like youth group was the first place that I was really like given like a leadership role and been like, you're going to collaborate with other people your age, but you are the ones who are going to make this happen. And we were given a lot of freedom to sort of arrange what we wanted to do and try out different things. And that ethos carried me through a lot of different jobs, and I noticed at some point, and that's how I kind of made this long and winding road back to Div School, that UU values and the values certainly of like youth group and how we organized ourselves within youth group were bubbling up in lots of different parts of my life. And that was really special. It was a really special part of my high school experience. That and orchestra were like the things I did. And I think they really grounded me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So I grew up also in a pretty great sort of small, medium-sized youth group in the Framingham church. And it was really the first place that I was building, kind of intentional community, that we were regularly checking in with each other, that we were engaged in these wider projects. We were doing justice projects, but we were also, connecting and deep listening and sharing with each other. And it really is, I mean, you think of the mess that so many kids are in high school, to have a touch point like that is just so amazing. So one of the things that we've been enjoying is talking to folks about the principles and the sources. So did you have a favorite, or one that's particularly resonant for you in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily my favorite, but I also don't read the sources, I feel like, as much as the principles. So it's nice to see them written out and kind of reflect on them. Yeah, with taking this Magic in the Contemporary World course on neo-paganism, I'm curious to speak a little bit more about spiritual teaching of earth-centered traditions as one of our sources, because I think sometimes Sometimes actually I feel like, in the way that we honor the seasons and things like that, it's very much present in UU worship. And sometimes I feel like it kind of fades to the background a little. So this course has just been giving me food for thought in that regard.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And it comes up, this is a sort of further extension of that, but so many people will say nature is my church, that's where, that's one of the reasons that I fly fish is just those moments standing in the middle of a river with water rushing past me and the beautiful leaves around everywhere. And, those kind of times of contemplation early in the morning with the kind of light, the way it is. And that's the place that I return, where I reconnect. And I think, especially now, I think of those moments where you take off the mask when you walk outside after being inside for a long time and you taste fresh air for the first time.
Yeah.
And these teachings. So, but what else? What is the class? So it's neo-paganism in Italy?
Right. So the class is Magic in the Contemporary World. We're covering a lot of ground. The professor, her name is Dr. Giovanna Parmigiani. She's an anthropologist who studies magic practitioners. Her group of study are a group of women in southern Italy, neo-pagans. But the really interesting thing about her and her teaching the class is in doing this field work, she began to be a practitioner herself. So she is not only an academic who studies these sorts of things, but is actually a magic practitioner. So
wow.
It's been fascinating. We've been learning in terms of earth-centered traditions. We've been talking a lot about sort of the idea of enchantment and these academic theories that I actually think are interesting, though, and I feel like a lot of UUs would be interested in this concept of what's called occulture. And let's see if I remember the name. This is good. This is like a little quiz for me.
Yeah.
Oh, Christopher Partridge. He's this academic who writes about the occult and magic and things like that. And he comes up with this term called occulture, which is basically occult mixed with the word culture.
Yeah.
And the idea that we're in a moment that we think of the world as being very secular, but it feels like there's all these like new age and neo-paganism and energy work. Like there's a lot of stuff, at least in the New England Western world, that sort of seems like it's coming back into the conversation.
Yeah.
His idea of a culture is actually like the world was never secular. It's always been enchanted. It's really that we're rediscovering how it's enchanted. So the enchantment never left us. It's all around us. It's part of nature. It's part of these like earth-based teachings and wisdom that's been around for millennia. And now it's really a moment where a culture is people bringing that sort of more into the mainstream. That's why you're seeing it more. But I just love this idea that like the enchantment never left us. Yeah. It's all around us. Yeah. It's just about like removing certain, maybe like a veil or something that we have over it and seeing it a little differently. It's been really staying with me this past,
that's interesting.
2 months.
That's beautiful.
I think that sixth source, most of us are familiar with the 7 principles, and we've got these 6 sources, which folks are often less familiar with. And that sixth one, the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. So it sounds like this class is a kind of a crash course in that, but that's a source of UU spirituality that I know very little about, and I'd like to learn more about. Occulture is a new term for me. I like it.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's part of right this moment and our response to climate change and our response to the stark realities of the earth and our presence on it. I think it is really helpful to ground it in that same source, so be grounded in this enchantment at the same time as we're looking at, carbon neutrality and how to sort of help reverse the course of this really stark and sort of terrifying moment.
Yeah.
See, that's what seminary is about, Sam.
Okay, so I think I think of myself as like the just on the cusp of being the older millennials. I was born in 1981, so I think I'm technically a millennial, but I'm just like one of the older millennials.
Right.
But Joelle, so how do you? I'm sorry, I got to ask this question. So, like, how do you think of your generation? How do you define the generation that you're in, and your generation's values? And I'm wondering if your generation is one that's experiencing more of a re-enchantment of the world than older generations. Does that resonate at all? Or how do you think of your
Interesting
generation?
question.
That's a great question.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll speak for my generation.
Yeah.
I'm born in '89, so I'm 32. So I think I'm pretty squarely millennial.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're really tired but hopeful is sort of how I would say. I mean, I think to paint it in way too broad strokes, but basically, like, in terms of what the historical moment that we've lived through was really, like, my childhood was defined by 9/11, and then moving into the Obama years, and then the whiplash into the Trump years. Not that all life is organized around US politics, but really in terms of like these big events that have really marked, and then the rise of the internet and social media and things like that. I think that at our best, my generation is very tired, is not secure in terms of material jobs, or we see the issues because we've had to kind of deal with them in terms of housing and healthcare and all of these really practical material concerns. But we also have so much information and a lot of sometimes education, and see openings where the world could be different and still want to believe in that. I mean, that's where I place myself. So, I see the toll. I'm just thinking more of like my peers, my friends. I see the toll the past few years has really taken on people as they start to like build their professional lives and family lives and things like that. Not being able to afford a house the way their parents could, like these real sort of like things that make the structures of one's life feel pretty shaky. But I also see an incredible amount of, I'm thinking of like Black Lives Matter uprisings last summer, like an incredible amount of like stamina and hope. Things like that I think it's certainly been a little rocky. I mean, it's been rocky for all of us, but I'm always comforted, I suppose, by seeing that. And then, I will say my partner and I, because she works with younger people, we talk a lot about younger folks. And I will say, like, I am not just comforted, I am pumped for people who are even younger than us. I just think that there's
I totally
conversations
agree.
Around like gender identity, around politics, around that are just like so exciting. And so if the millennials, if we can just like hang in there and keep it going for some people who are a little bit younger than us too, I feel excited about that.
I feel the same way. And so I'm TAing a class at the moment in English literature. And so I've got a bunch of freshmen that I'm teaching. And well, I feel two things. Well, the first thing is, oh my God, you guys are children. Wow. You guys are really young. It's like, wow, when did undergraduates become so young? Anyway, that's the first thing. But the second thing is that it's just really exciting because I remember when I was an undergrad, this is back in the early 2000s, there was this sort of, it was sort of modish to be very cynical. But they're not cynical at all. They're not a cynical generation. They're a very open-minded generation. They're a very accepting generation. They're a very curious generation. And they're very spiritually open, I find. I'm reading a lot of their fictional stories that they're writing, and they show a spiritual and imaginative openness, which is I think is wonderful. So I feel like the truth is the future is in good hands. And the truth is in good hands.
I didn't really speak to the enchantment part. I think culture is going on left and right for people in my generation and younger. I mean, the weird threads maybe I shouldn't even call them weird. I think they're just, there are so many, and I feel that I don't understand what's going on when I find like witch talk, which is like the TikTok thread that is dedicated to like neo-Wiccan practices. Like,
I did not know about that.
There is so much going on that. Yeah.
It's interesting, the sort of generationality and looking at this next generation. And I was just talking the other day with Kathy Carpenter, who's lovely. She's the wife of one of my predecessor ministers at the church, and she's 87 years old, though she, you'd think she was decades younger just by her kind of spirit and enthusiasm. And anyway, we were having this fascinating conversation about when they were back in South Africa in the midst of the rise of apartheid, and that she and Victor were part of a resistance back in the day. And so I was just really struck by the sort of cycles of history, right? And how their activism then makes all of this possible. So we have all of these kind of waves and learning from the generations before, and it's just kind of all slowly transforming, both in lots of directions. You also have the tides of hate and resistance also transforming and adapting. And so I also am really hopeful when I look at the kind of challenges that they faced in their work and their activism, 60 years ago, and the challenges that, we face now, and all the possibilities for the future. So the other thing we've done often is, if you have any questions for us, you feel free, especially Sam.
I do. Really? I have a question. Yeah. I love turning the tables and getting to ask questions. So my question for both of you is, what is something that you consider or feel is a spiritual practice that might not at first glance to others seem like a spiritual practice?
Good one.
That's a good one. Chris, do you have a good answer to that? Or
yeah,
do you think about that?
Yeah, so
that's a good question.
I like the nuance of that doesn't seem like a spiritual practice, because for me, we've just been, one of my favorite things in ministry over the years is connecting with new people on their way into the church. And Sam and I have just been hosting a Journey to Membership class, and one of the things that we were talking about with those folks was their desire to create a spiritual practice, and that was pretty common theme among a lot of them to want to explore it. So I think, getting back and all of the, the discipline and the meditation practice and the things that I do that I think of like, oh, okay, this is my spiritual practice. But I think of there's this great poem. I think it's, Oriah Mountain Dreamer is the name of the lady. Anyway, somebody had it. I used it in a wedding. The very first wedding I did, I don't know, many, many years ago, was on their fridge, and they used it but there's this one line about, can you get up in the middle of the night and do what needs to be done for the children? And so I think that, when I think of parenting and the moments where, just exhausted, with just the dregs of human will that are left in the bottom of the barrel of my soul, like scraping up that last little bit of energy to show up and do what needs to be done for the children. If it's coming to somebody with a nightmare, or somebody sick, or whatever it is, showing up in whatever way. I think that, to me, those are the times where I feel like I've been like kind of forged, for lack of a better word, as a person. And that's not entirely obvious. I think in partnership the same way, like those moments where, showing up in hard conversations with my beloved and staying in the midst of the difficult moments. I think those are the times where, that's the practice. That's the practice to me of kind of becoming and growing as a person. So. What about you, Sam?
Well, for me, I think spiritual practice is about finding ways to ground myself in what is permanent, because I feel that we're in a world that feels very temporary and in very rapid motion and very mutable. And I feel this partly with politics and the economy. We don't know where everything's going. Everything's rocky. But I also, I think, more deeply feel this about nature because of climate change and what we're doing to the planet. And I've been thinking recently that thinking about climate change and thinking about what we're doing to the biosphere that we live in makes me feel this deep grief that I don't really know how to process. And so I've been thinking about, how do I sort of learn to live with this feeling of grief at something that's happening all around me and that I can't really change. And I've been trying to find ways of connecting with the deep past. I'm trying to read more about the early history of humanity, so prehistorical humanity, so I can see the history of of human beings in a much larger perspective. And I'm also doing just things like going out and looking up into the trees when the evening light hits them at a certain angle, or just lying down in the grass and looking at the blades of grass and looking at the little bugs that walk around them, and just trying to say thank you. I'm not necessarily out loud, but feel grateful for this moment and for what we stunningly have all around us. Yeah, that's not very coherent, but I'm trying to develop
coherent, yeah.
I'm trying to develop ways of solacing myself and strengthening myself spiritually by grounding myself in what is around me and what is ancient and what is permanent. And I guess related to that, it might seem very different, but I love learning like ancient languages, and I'm trying to learn a new one at the moment. I'm taking this Old English class, and it's it's not nearly as Old English is not nearly as old as nature, but or of the human race, but it's just like getting a sense of where I am in the relation to a much larger whole, which goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, and very different kinds of people who called themselves English, and very different language that called itself the English language, and getting a sense of the contingency of who I am and where I am. And anyway, that's what I'm trying to do at the moment.
What about you, Joelle?
Yeah, I guess Sam, I really appreciated what you said around, because I feel that too sometimes, the weight of what is its grief around, getting older and thinking about the earth and the planet and climate change. And sometimes there's what one does and acts to try to play one's part in that. And then there's also just the emotional stuff of having to hold what that reality is, which I think is something that I've only really started to accept and grapple with in the past, like in divinity school, because climate change comes up a lot. Understandably, you have a lot of people sort of trying to wrestle with that and how they can serve people in that regard. But anyway, so your sharing reminded me of, it was when I was still living in New York, when museums were only just back open post-COVID, and there was a lot of rules and procedures to go, and you'd be masked and timed and everything. But I managed to go on a random afternoon to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And that experience, in terms of connecting with history and people that came before, it was a mixture of not having been in a museum, and museums are very special to me, like not having been able to do that for a long time. It was very empty because of COVID regulations.
Right.
And getting to spend a few hours, I just feel like sometimes you can, that was a spiritual experience. And sometimes you can really take yourself to a place in a museum when I really try to conceptualize the fact that like hands like mine carved that ancient Egyptian thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Or there are these two figures in a hieroglyph that I remember seeing, and they were holding hands. And like, of course, you have all of this imagery and the history that you might not know, and you might not know which pharaoh and what era, but I remember seeing just the hands being held in this relief from, several thousand years ago. And I just remember being so struck by that. And I remember I had been feeling very nervous with Zoom divinity school, and am I doing the right thing? And am I studying the right thing? And I just remember being at the museum and looking at all of this artwork people had made, and from their belief systems and things that felt so human, and being like, oh, of course I should be in divinity school. This makes perfect sense. And that to me is like the really good spiritual stuff that you can get from going and connecting with these objects that are from so long ago. So thank you. You sparked that memory.
Well, Sam, that was super fascinating.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Yeah,
thank you so much,
really
Joelle.
So lucky to have Joelle and be able to partner with her in her formation. And as always, if anybody has any questions for either of us, please email them in. We will be sort of beginning to release the shows and answer them. And so today we have so much great stuff with Joelle. There's no questions today, But do please email me, minister@uubelmont.org, any kind of question you have. And we're really excited. Next week, we have Simon Andrews, our wonderful music department person, who's our organist and leads the choirs. And he's really just such an amazing person. And so we'll have Simon next week, and then more great stuff coming. So thanks, everybody, for your listening, and thanks, Sam, for doing this.
See you next week.